The most chilling truths are often whispered by the most innocent. Witness how a child's pure honesty shattered a perfect crime. Police Chief David Monroe almost choked on his coffee when he heard those words coming out of the mouth of a 5-year-old child. Lily Thorne was sitting in the police station chair, swinging her legs, holding a worn teddy bear as she repeated with the frightening naturalness of someone recounting what they had for lunch, "Daddy is down there where Mommy put the new tiles." "Kids have such vivid imaginations," muttered Sergeant Alex Vance, not even looking up from his paperwork. She probably saw a horror movie. But there was something in Lily's eyes that made the chief hesitate. Those big, serious eyes didn't have the typical fantasy of a child making up stories. They were the eyes of someone who had seen something they should never have witnessed. Monroe knew that look. He'd seen it in trauma victims, but never in such a young child. The neighbor who brought the girl in, Mrs. Evelyn Clark, a 67-year-old black woman, insisted that something was wrong. "Samuel Thorne has been missing for 4 days, Deputy. It's not like him to disappear like this, leaving his daughter behind. That man wouldn't even go to the grocery store without telling someone where he was going." Monroe knew Samuel by sight, a respected civil engineer in the community, always punctual for his daughter's school appointments, the kind of father who carried photos of his daughter in his wallet and never missed a school presentation. The contrast with his wife was stark, like night and day. Isabella Thorne had appeared at the police station only once, filing a missing person report about her husband with the same ease as someone renewing their driver's license. A well-dressed white woman, she spoke with that condescending tone Monroe recognized all too well, the voice of someone who had always been taken seriously because of the color of her skin and the size of her bank account. "My husband sometimes travels for work without telling me," Isabella had said, adjusting her designer handbag. "It's no big deal. Samuel is unpredictable." The pause before unpredictable had sounded as false as a counterfeit bill, but Monroe hadn't paid much attention to it at the time. "Detective," Mrs. Clark lowered her voice, looking around nervously. "There's something I didn't tell you. The night Samuel disappeared, I heard screams coming from the house, strange noises, as if someone was dragging something heavy across the floor. And the next day, a renovation company showed up, working late into the night." Monroe felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of renovations?" "The kitchen floor. Isabella said it was a surprise for Samuel when he got back from his trip." The irony in the woman's voice was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The chief vaguely remembered Isabella mentioning a small renovation during her statement, but it had seemed like an insignificant detail at the time. Now, looking at Lily, Monroe felt like he had missed something criminally important in that initial conversation. The girl was drawing on the paper he had given her, creating what appeared to be a bedroom with a man lying under a checkered floor. The details were disturbingly accurate for a 5-year-old. "Lily," Monroe said, crouching down to the child's height and modulating his voice to sound as gentle as possible, "where exactly is Daddy?" "In the new kitchen," she replied without hesitation. "Mommy said it was our secret. But Daddy is very cold down there. He cried very loudly before he went quiet forever." Mrs. Clark covered her mouth with her hands, horrified. Alex finally looked up from his paperwork, realizing for the first time the absolute gravity of the situation. "Lily, sweetheart," Monroe continued in a controlled voice, "can you tell me what happened the night Daddy went quiet?" The girl looked at the teddy bear as if asking the toy for permission to tell the secret. "Mommy hit Daddy with a big pot from the kitchen. Daddy fell to the floor and didn't get up. Then Mom cried a lot and said it was his fault for being stubborn and not listening." A deathly silence fell over the police station. Monroe felt his heart pounding in his chest. "And then what did Mom do?" "She took the blue sheet from my room and wrapped Daddy all up in it. Then she dug a big hole in the kitchen and put him in it. Then the men came with the new floor tiles and covered everything up." Lily spoke as if she were describing her grandmother's cake recipe, her naturalness making it all the more disturbing. What Monroe didn't know was that at that very moment, 40 miles away, Isabella Thorne was in her private lawyer's office, calmly explaining why she needed to speed up the life insurance process for her missing husband. She had no idea that Samuel Thorne had discovered something about his wife's cryptocurrency investments that was worth much more than his own life. Much less did she imagine that Lily, despite her 5 years of age, was keeping secrets that would turn this routine disappearance case into the biggest criminal twist the city had ever seen. As he looked closely at the girl's drawing, Monroe noticed a detail that made his blood run cold. She had drawn not only a man under the floor but also small rectangular bags next to him, as if she knew exactly what else was buried in that hastily renovated kitchen. If this story of mystery and injustice has already intrigued you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what you're about to discover about what really happened in that house goes far beyond anything anyone could have imagined. What else had Lily witnessed on that terrible night? And why did a 5-year-old girl know details about a crime that even the police hadn't investigated yet? The answer was buried along with much more than just a body, and each new revelation would make this case even more shocking. Monroe knew he had something much bigger than a simple missing person case on his hands. 2 hours after Lily's revelation, he was on the phone with Judge Arthur Hayes, trying to get a search warrant for the Thorne residence. "Chief, are you asking me to authorize digging up a family's backyard based on the testimony of a 5-year-old? The judge's voice sounded skeptical over the phone. "That won't hold up for 5 minutes in court. Sir, we have a child who has described specific details about a crime, a suspicious renovation carried out immediately after the disappearance, and a wife who is displaying an unusual coldness for the situation." Monroe felt frustration rising in his chest. "And do you have any physical evidence? Adult witnesses? Anything besides the word of a traumatized little girl?" Judge Hayes hung up the phone harder than he intended. 20 years on the force, and he was still facing the same problem. When it came to wealthy white families, bureaucracy became an insurmountable wall. Alex approached the desk with a grim expression. "Chief, I just got an interesting call. Isabella Thorne was at her lawyer's office this morning. It looks like she wants to speed up her husband's life insurance claim." How convenient. Monroe massaged his temples, feeling a familiar headache coming on. How long has Samuel been missing? 4 days, and she's already chasing money? At that moment, the station phone rang. Alex answered, and after a few seconds, covered the receiver with his hand. "It's her. Isabella Thorne. She wants to talk to you." Monroe took a deep breath before answering. "Deputy Monroe, Chief Monroe, this is Isabella Thorne. I heard my daughter was there today." Her voice was controlled, but there was an underlying tension she couldn't completely hide. "Your daughter is fine, Mrs. Thorne. She was worried about her father. Lily has a very active imagination, Chief. I hope you didn't take a little girl's fantasies too seriously." The condescending tone was unmistakable. Monroe felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of fantasies, specifically?" "Oh, you know how kids are, always making up stories about monsters under the bed, people buried in the backyard." Isabella laughed awkwardly. "It's just her way of coping with her father's temporary absence." "Interesting that you mentioned people buried, Mrs. Thorne. Your daughter was very specific about the location." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Deputy, I hope you're not considering disturbing a grieving family based on the fantasies of a traumatized child. My lawyer would be very disappointed in such an unprofessional approach." The veiled threat was crystal clear. Monroe knew the game. Influential families always had expensive lawyers ready to turn police investigations into bureaucratic nightmares. "Just doing my job, ma'am. Have a nice day." After she hung up, Monroe stared at the phone for a long moment. In her career, she had learned to read people, and Isabella Thorne had just confirmed her suspicions in the worst possible way. No one spontaneously mentions people buried unless they have a very specific reason for it being on their mind. Alex approached again. "Chief, there's one more thing. I got Samuel's phone records for the last 30 days. Interesting, he made several calls to a divorce lawyer the week before he disappeared." Monroe felt a piece of the puzzle fall into place. Samuel was planning to get a divorce. And there's more. A quick check of the county records, the house is in his name, inherited from his father. If he died without a will, it would go to his wife. But if there was a divorce, she would lose everything. Monroe leaned back in his chair, the picture becoming crystal clear: financial motive, opportunity during the renovation, and now we know she had urgency. At that moment, Mrs. Clark entered the station accompanied by Lily. The girl ran straight to Monroe as if he were a longtime friend. "Detective Monroe." "Mom is mad at me for talking about Dad," Lily said, climbing onto the chair next to his desk. "Why is she mad, sweetie?" "She said they're going to take her away now and I'll be all alone. But I told her you seem nice and you won't let that happen." Monroe's heart sank. This innocent child had no idea of the gravity of the situation she had unleashed with her brutal honesty. "Lily, do you remember anything else about the night your daddy was quiet?" The girl thought for a moment. "Mommy cried a lot after that, and she talked on the phone with a man who called her my love." "Daddy never called her that." Mrs. Clark and Monroe exchanged meaningful glances. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place: an extramarital affair. "And do you know who that man on the phone was?" "I don't know his name, but he came to the house once when Dad was at work. Mom said he was Uncle Robert, but Dad doesn't have a brother." Lily swung her legs in her chair. "And they kissed on the mouth, like Mom and Dad used to do before they started fighting all the time." Monroe closed his eyes for a moment. A 5-year-old had provided more useful information in 2 conversations than many detectives could get in weeks of investigation. Lily's innocence was both a blessing and a curse. She saw everything but didn't understand the devastating implications of what she had witnessed. While Isabella Thorne was probably at home coldly calculating how to expedite the life insurance process and plan her new life with her lover, a brave little girl had just handed justice the information it needed to unravel a premeditated murder. What the arrogant widow didn't know was that every veiled threat and every elaborate lie only dug her grave deeper, while the innocent truth of a child became the most powerful weapon Monroe had ever held in his hands. Monroe knew that taking on an influential family would require more than police intuition. It would require surgical strategy. While Isabella Thorne probably slept peacefully, confident in her expensive lawyers and political connections, the chief spent the night building a case she would never see coming. "Alex, I need you to do something unofficial for me," Monroe said, lowering his voice in the empty station. "Do you know anyone at the telecom company who can help us with cell phone location records?" Alex smiled mischievously. "My brother-in-law works there." "What kind of unofficial information do you need?" "Samuel Thorne's cell phone location on the night of his disappearance, and if possible, data from the tower closest to the Thorne home." Monroe scribbled notes in a notebook he kept away from the official files. "I want to know if his phone was stationary in any specific location." Meanwhile, Mrs. Clark had become an unexpectedly valuable ally. The retired lady had something Monroe desperately needed: time, patience, and the invisible ability that only elderly neighbors have to observe everything without being noticed. "Chief," she called mid-morning, whispering into the phone, "Isabella is packing 2 big suitcases, and that man Lily mentioned, Uncle Robert, is helping her." Monroe felt his adrenaline spike. "Can you see his license plate?" "I already wrote it down. And there's more, they're taking boxes out of the basement, boxes that look too heavy for 2 people to carry with such difficulty." "Mrs. Clark, you're a better detective than half my officers." Monroe smiled for the first time in days. "Keep watching, but keep your distance. If they realize they're being watched." "Chief, I have 70 years of experience watching people. They won't notice me." The pause in the conversation was interrupted by Alex, who returned with information that would make Isabella Thorne completely rethink her arrogance. "Chief, my brother-in-law got the data. Samuel Thorne's cell phone was stationary at his residence from 10 p.m. until 3 a.m. on the day of the disappearance. After that, the signal just died. Exactly the time Lily said she witnessed the argument and assault." Monroe closed his eyes, feeling the pieces fall into place. "And you were able to identify Uncle Robert?" "Robert Reed, 42 years old, financial advisor. And here's where it gets interesting. He has a cryptocurrency company registered under the name of, guess who? Isabella Thorne." "Exactly. a shell company registered 3 months before Samuel disappeared. They've been planning an exit for a long time. At that moment, Monroe had an idea that would make all the difference. He called Dr. Sophia Davis, a renowned child psychologist and one of the few people he trusted completely to handle sensitive cases. "Sophia, I need a favor. I have a 5-year-old girl who witnessed something traumatic. She's already spoken to me, but I need someone with your experience to validate her statement so that it's irrefutable in court. Mike, you know that statements from children this young are rarely accepted as evidence. This is different, Sophia. This child has details that only an eyewitness could have. And if we can document it properly with your expertise, we have a real chance of getting justice." Dr. Davis agreed to meet Lily that afternoon. Meanwhile, Monroe prepared his riskiest move, confronting Isabella Thorne before she could get away. "Alex, let's pay Mrs. Thorne a social call. Nothing official, just checking to see how she's handling her husband's disappearance." Monroe's smile had a predatory quality. Sometimes the most arrogant people make the stupidest mistakes when they feel too secure. As they drove to the Thorne home, Monroe knew he was playing a dangerous game. Isabella had probably already called her lawyers. But there was one thing that all the money in the world couldn't buy: the innocent truth of a child who hadn't yet learned to lie. What Isabella Thorne didn't know was that every veiled threat, every condescending smile, and every attempt to use privilege to escape justice only fueled the determination of a man who had dedicated his entire life to protecting the vulnerable from the powerful. And when the truth finally came out, no lawyer would be expensive enough to contain the damage. Arriving at the house, Monroe noticed the suitcases in Robert's car and smiled inwardly. Guilty people always make the same mistake: they think they're smarter than everyone around them. But this time, arrogance would be the very instrument of his downfall, and justice would come through the honest words of a brave girl who refused to keep secrets about the father she loved. Monroe knocked on the Thorne's door with the confidence of someone holding all the winning cards. When Isabella opened the door, her fake smile disappeared when she saw the determined expression on the chief's face. "Mrs. Thorne, I'm glad to find you still here. From what I can see, you're getting ready for a trip." Monroe discreetly pointed to the suitcases in Robert's car, who quickly hid behind the curtain. "Just a long weekend, to clear our heads while we wait for news about Samuel." Isabella tried to keep her tone casual, but her hands were shaking slightly. "Interesting, especially considering that I just discovered something fascinating about your husband's cell phone." Monroe took an envelope from his pocket. "Cell tower data shows that his phone was stationary here at your house from 10 p.m. until exactly 3 a.m. on the day of his disappearance. After that, the signal dropped completely." Isabella's face paled visibly. "He must have forgotten his charger. Funny, because Lily told me that was exactly when she witnessed you attacking Samuel with a cast iron skillet." Monroe watched every micro-expression on Isabella's face. "And there's more. We found your shell cryptocurrency company registered jointly with Robert Reed." At that moment, Robert appeared at the door, clearly nervous. "Robert Reed, I presume? The Uncle Robert Lily mentioned?" Monroe smiled coldly. "Interesting how a 5-year-old can be more honest than 2 adults with college degrees. You can't prove anything." Isabella tried to regain her composure, but her voice already sounded desperate. "It's just speculation based on the fantasies of a traumatized child." Monroe laughed darkly. "Speculation, Mrs. Thorne? While you thought you were being clever, Mrs. Clark has been documenting your every move, including the heavy boxes you took out of the basement earlier today." The blood drained completely from Robert's face. "Isabella, you said no one was paying attention." "Shut up!" Isabella screamed, completely losing control for the first time. "And there's more," Monroe continued, relishing every second of the revelation. "We've gained access to the bank records of your shell company. Suspicious transfers, money disappearing from Samuel's joint account, and attempts to speed up the life insurance. Did you really believe you could murder a man, bury him in his own home, and still profit from it?" Robert began to sweat visibly. "Isabella, you told me he had agreed to an amicable divorce. You lied about everything, you idiot." Isabella turned on Robert like a cornered animal. You believed a man like Samuel would split his inheritance with me? He was going to leave me penniless. Monroe watched the pair collapse with satisfaction. Arrogant people always destroy themselves when the pressure mounts. You know what impresses me the most? Monroe continued calmly. You completely underestimated a 5-year-old child. You thought you could manipulate Lily into keeping quiet about her own father's murder. What kind of monsters do that? Isabella was shaking with rage and despair. That girl doesn't understand anything. She doesn't know what she saw. She knew enough to lead us straight to her father's body, and she knew enough to describe exactly how you killed Samuel with an iron pot while he had his back turned. Monroe moved closer. And the most ironic part? If you had treated Lily with love and care, she might never have spoken. But you terrorized her so much that she trusted strangers over her own mother. Robert began to cry uncontrollably. I didn't know she was going to kill anyone. I just helped with the money. You helped bury the body, Robert. Lily saw you digging with her mother. Monroe showed no mercy. And now you're both going to get to know the justice system you tried to cheat. Isabella made one last desperate attempt. You can't trust the word of a child against 2 respectable adults. Respectable adults? Monroe laughed openly. A murderer and her accomplice who tried to profit from the crime. And what about the child? She gave us information that led directly to physical evidence, telecommunications data, and financial records. Lily's innocent truth was more reliable than all of your elaborate lies. At that moment, sirens began to wail in the distance. Monroe had called for backup before arriving. The most pathetic thing of all, Monroe concluded as the police cars approached, is that you destroyed a family, traumatized an innocent child, and ruined your own lives out of pure greed. Samuel Thorne was a decent man who deserved much better than a murderous wife and a cowardly death. Isabella collapsed in tears of despair when she realized there was no way out. Robert tried to run, but Monroe had already blocked all escape routes. The arrogance that had sustained them for days had completely evaporated, replaced by the raw panic of those who finally understood that justice had come at the hands of a brave girl who refused to keep secrets about the father she loved. As the handcuffs clicked around their wrists, one question hung in the air: how would Lily react when she learned that her courage had brought justice to her father and freedom to herself? 6 months after the trial that shocked the city, Monroe was in his office when he received a call that made him smile for the first time in weeks. It was Mrs. Evelyn Clark, now Lily's legal guardian, with news that warmed his heart. Chief, you need to know, Lily is thriving at her new school. The psychologist said she's recovering beautifully. And yesterday, she asked me if she could write you a letter. Monroe looked out the window, remembering the brave little girl who had changed everything with her brutal honesty. And how is she handling everything? She understands that her mother did something very wrong, but she doesn't hold any anger. Yesterday, she said to me, Grandma Clark, I helped Daddy not be forgotten, right? The woman's voice broke. That child has a wisdom that many adults will never have. Meanwhile, at the state women's penitentiary, Isabella Thorne was discovering that privilege and money don't buy respect among inmates. Sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, she spent her days in isolation, shunned even by other prisoners who despise someone who would kill her own husband and traumatize a child. Robert Reed was no luckier. Sentenced to 25 years as an accomplice, he lost not only his freedom but also the entire fortune he had helped Isabella steal from Samuel. The cryptocurrency investments that had seemed so smart evaporated when authorities froze all the shell company's accounts. The irony was delicious: 2 sophisticated adults who thought they were too smart to be caught by a 5-year-old ended up destroyed by the very innocence they tried to exploit. Dr. Sophia Davis, the psychologist who had documented Lily's trauma, became a fierce advocate for the rights of child victims of domestic crime. The Lily Thorne case changed how we treat child testimony, she explained in lectures across the country. A child who hasn't learned to lie can be the most reliable witness there is. Monroe often received calls from other detectives, consulting on similar cases. The Lily Protocol, as it became known, established guidelines for investigating crimes based on children's accounts, saving dozens of families from similar situations. The house where Samuel was murdered stood empty for months until Mrs. Clark suggested something that made Monroe smile. Why don't we turn it into a community center? A place where kids can play and feel safe to speak up when something is wrong. The proposal was unanimously approved by the city council. The Samuel Thorne Center has become a symbol of how a child's truth can transform tragedy into hope. On the first anniversary of Samuel's death, Monroe visited the grave with Lily and Mrs. Clark. The girl, now 6, placed yellow flowers, her father's favorite, on the grave and whispered, "Daddy, everyone knows you were a good man. No one will forget." Monroe knelt beside Lily. "You know you're a hero, right? Because of your courage, your father got justice, and you're safe." Lily smiled with that ancient wisdom that some children develop after weathering storms. "I just told the truth, Uncle David. Grandma Clark taught me that lying hurts more than the truth." Months later, Monroe learned that Isabella had tried to appeal the sentence, arguing that a child's testimony should not have been considered. The request was denied in less than 24 hours. The judge was clear: credibility has no age. This child has shown more integrity and courage than many adults who have come before this court. The last news about Robert came through the newspapers. He had lost his mind in prison, repeating obsessively, "The girl knew. The girl knew everything," until he was transferred to the psychiatric ward. Monroe kept in his drawer a photo that Mrs. Clark had taken of Lily at the community center playground, smiling on the swing that had been donated in memory of her father. Whenever a difficult case came across his desk, he would look at that photo and remember, sometimes justice comes through the most unlikely voices. The arrogance of Isabella Thorne, who believed she could manipulate a child and cheat the system, had become her own social and legal death sentence. And Lily, the little girl who just wanted her daddy not to be forgotten, proved that the truth whispered by an innocent heart is more powerful than all the lies concocted by corrupt hearts. If this story touched your heart and made you believe that justice still exists, subscribe to the channel to discover more cases where the courage of ordinary people defeated the arrogance of those who thought themselves untouchable. Because sometimes the greatest victories come from the smallest warriors.